All right, everyone, welcome. My name is Jason Grillo with AirMiners. It's wonderful to see you all here today for our discussion about non-dilutive financing. It's been a little while since we've had an event, but that's not for lack of things happening in carbon removal. Certainly, with the billions committed to carbon removal through financing and advanced market commitments and pre-purchases, that's and potential venture financing, that's just incredible and unprecedented for our industry. Before and also over the last month or so, we've seen legislation introduced in the United States for carbon removal, at least 3 different bills by my count, including the Carbon Dioxide Removal Leadership Act, the Remove Act, and last week, the CREST Act for carbon storage. More on carbon storage at our event on July 5th, by the way. We'll get to that in a second at the tail end of things. What I wanted to also talk a little bit about is some of the headwinds that we're starting to see in the macroeconomic environment. That certainly inflation's an issue. Certainly, we've heard the fears of recession. I just wanted to come up and say that AirMiners is here to keep the industry moving, and we will do that. We believe in you, and we believe that the carbon removal industry is a potential economic engine for future growth. And for having an impact on our climate. So thank you all for your time and attention to date so far. A little bit about our event today. We've got Joel Armin Hoyland from Climate Finance Solutions talking about non-dilutive financing. Non-dilutive financing is a way of helping see people through, early companies through from a way that might not be necessarily equity funding. Also, in terms of our format for the event, Joel's going to come on in a minute and talk a little bit about what Climate Finance Solutions does and the different options for non-dilutive financing. Then we're going to open it up to you, for you all to raise your hand, ask questions, and ask Joel about the items that are most on your mind today. I'll come on at the very tail end with some additional announcements about what we are doing in the next month or so with AirMiners. By the way, before I go any further, just a reminder for those interested in applying to AirMiners Launchpad, applications are due on June 30th. So launchpad.airminers.org/apply for the application. So take a look at that. I just shared it in the chat. Meantime, without further ado, Joel, good to see you.
Thanks, Jason. It's great to see everyone. It's an awesome turnout. So I'm very, very stoked to see everyone. Yeah, so as Jason said, I'm the founder and CEO of Climate Finance Solutions. We're a fully climate-focused and mission-driven consultancy that helps companies all over the world access non-dilutive funding. As Jason briefly alluded to, non-dilutive funding is capital that companies receive that does not require them to give up equity, right? So for climate startups, that's typically grants and debt, or even incentives, or individual contributions. Frankly, in this funding environment, with the billions and hundreds of billions of dollars that are kind of sloshing around, most clients are coming to us looking for grants, and we really specialize in multi-million-dollar grants, and often tens of millions of dollars, grants that are worth tens of millions of dollars for an individual award. I think another nice thing about non-dilutive funding is that it is relatively insulated from volatility in markets in the investment environment. So, I think my opinion is it's a very important part of the capital stack at all times, but I think potentially, especially in these times, it can be a really important thing to focus on. So just very briefly, my background, I started a fully climate focused company, because of my own personal mission in climate. I've worked in climate my entire career, a pretty wide range of things though. So, everything from academic research to working at a regulatory agency. I was on the board of directors for a granting fund for a while. So I've kind of been on the funder side of things. I worked in bioenergy and biochar for a while. And so I was first kind of on the engineering side, and then the manufacturing team, I was running that. In product development, I worked in climate related sustainable development internationally for several years. And through this, over the past decade or so, the companies I was working with were, startups and SMEs, and I was helping them secure tens of millions of dollars in non-dilutive funding, and really saw how, this form of capital could completely change the trajectory of a company. And when I moved back to the U.S. at the beginning of 2020, I saw, I looked at the climate ecosystem and saw that I could really have a major impact and fill a gap in the ecosystem by, helping the most high impact companies secure this type of non-dilutive funding. So yeah, founded the company in the beginning of 2020. We now have a team of 15 people distributed all around the world. We do work globally, so we have clients on 6 continents now. But probably 75% of the work we do is in the US, but still work a lot internationally. Very experienced fundraising team. Over our careers, we've raised over $750 million in non-dilutive funding. As a team, we've raised over 80 with an 89% success rate in terms of dollars awarded versus dollars pursued for projects under 36 million. Another kind of key differentiator for CFS is, our technical depth. So we got 4 PhDs on the team. They have a collective over 40 years of experience in the national lab system, plus, work time at DOE and ARPA-E. And many of us have, been where you guys are in climate tech companies, often hardware companies, going through the R&D cycle, the product development cycle, the commercialization cycle, and scaling solutions. We have a couple of folks on the team who've taken climate tech companies public. So we really know what it is to kind of be on our client side of the table. We are sector agnostic. So we work only in climate, focus on climate impact, but we work in the full range of sectors. As we all know, climate touches everything. But we really focus on more kind of cutting edge or difficult industries. And obviously that includes carbon removal. And that's not just CO2. We work with other, other greenhouse gases, but I'm just going to call it CDR because that's easier to say. We definitely have had successes in CDR. Just in the last couple of weeks, we won, a $2 million grant for a client with the ARPA-E Hestia program, for developing carbon negative building materials. We just won a couple of grants of almost $1 million for some soil carbon projects. Last year, we won a $1.8 million philanthropic grant for the International Biochar Initiative. We're working on multiple multi-million-dollar projects in DAC to DOE. We're working in a variety of other projects in mineralization, both ocean and terrestrial, macroalgae, natural climate solutions. So a lot of other stuff. We have a lot of experience in CDR. And I have some personal interest in it as well. I am also the co-founder and advisor of a nonprofit called the Climate Map, or TCM. And, we also founded this just in the beginning of 2020, shortly after I founded CFS, and with really the goal of trying to discover opportunities at the frontier of CDR and addressing 2 really big needs that the industry has. Number one, the need to identify and test more pathways than we're looking at right now. And then second, just to build all of the public goods that are going to be needed to get to gigaton scale deployment. So we have a really impressive research team that digs deep into the different CDR verticals and assesses underexplored pathways. And then we put these insights together to provide direction for pretty much the full range of climate actors. So to date, we've covered mineralization, and now we're working on DACs. So to kind of go back to the non-dilutive funding front. So, I think in general, what I tell people is there's just never been a better time to secure funding for climate tech. I mean, there are hundreds of billions of dollars coming in to the ecosystem from a wide range of sources. Historically, under-resourced sectors are getting more attention. So these are, the difficult to abate sectors, industrial decarbonization, heavy transportation, buildings, et cetera. And then CDR is obviously included in that. And so that's coming in both from public funding, from philanthropic funding. There's other private funding and innovative mechanisms, some of which Jason alluded to. And I would say here, the big story over the last few years is really the opening of the public funding floodgates. It's just a completely different landscape than it was just a couple of years ago. In the US, there have been literally exponential increases in funding, non-dilutive funding for CDR. The Department of Energy has their carbon negative shot. There are multiple proposed bills. There's tax credits that 45Q and hopefully others coming out. And these are both CDR and also CCUS. There's billions of dollars in the bipartisan infrastructure law allocated. There's over $1 billion just in the regular 2022 budget. And then CDR R&D funding coming from DOE, USDA, NSF, mostly DOE, but really kind of a wide range of agencies. With the US states, I would say the prime example is California, that just has the most climate funding in general, along with New York. California knows that they have been a bit behind with CDR, and so there is an explicit allocation to CDR in the current budget, which is both engineered CDR and natural climate solutions. We're still trying to figure out how that's, well, not we, they are still trying to figure out how that gets distributed between the various agencies. But there's going to be 22 billion in this budget plus some that's left over, so $37 billion for climate in the California budget over just the next few years. So really exciting, huge increases. Obviously there's public funding in Europe as well. They do a great job of doing public funding in general. They have their relatively new innovation funds, the $10 billion fund. It's focused on breakthrough technologies, including carbon capture and CDR. Hundreds of millions of additional dollars in, for CDR and carbon capture in the Horizon program, which came out of the Green Deal that they put in place a couple of years ago. And then obviously some funding that's on kind of the EU level. There's also some funding in the various national systems. And then there's philanthropic funding too. So it's been actually pretty exciting. Just a lot of changes over the last couple, 2-3 years, like seeing basically a kind of a new generation of philanthropic funders that are coming into the space that are focused on CDR, and some other kind of really forward-thinking foundations focusing on CDR. And I think even though only 2% of philanthropy goes to climate, which is obviously woefully inadequate, I think that it has a really important role to play in funding climate tech, right? Especially very, very early or emerging technologies, and especially kind of from like the research to early entrepreneurship points, right? So this would be funding core science for emerging tech. That's before the government funding kind of catches up, because there's a little bit of a lag when things are emerging. Philanthropies are supporting lab exits and supporting startups before kind of VC funding comes into place, and doing a lot of ecosystem support, which is really important. And we're seeing a lot of that in CDR. So philanthropic funding, because a lot of CDR pathways are emerging, it's actually a relatively good fit for CDR, better in many cases than other types of climate solutions. And I will say that there are more incumbent philanthropies that are providing more funding for kind of CDR that's more natural climate solutions based, like biochar, soil carbon, things that have, maybe a stronger nexus to soil health or ecosystem services or things like that. But again, I think just, to double click on this point, there's just a lot more funding, hundreds of billions of dollars more funding from public sources. I think globally, there's just a few billion for climate from philanthropies. And, I'd say in general, public funding is more accessible by CDR startups. Philanthropies historically haven't done entrepreneur finance, although they are, this new kind of crop of philanthropies are focusing in the areas that I talked about. So yeah, I mean, I guess people ask me a lot, like, when can I secure this funding? Am I too early? Am I too late? And my answer is generally no. There's funding for pretty much every stage of company or solution at this point. So, for early R&D, there is typically, federal grants for things like materials research, other things that are relevant to that. There's EU funding. There's basic research dollars in the Horizon program. There are philanthropic grants, especially at this stage, kind of as we discussed. Moving into the applied research and development phase, there's still kind of federal funding. The DOE just put out, some DAC grants that I'm sure some of you are aware of that we're also working on. Other grants are going to be forthcoming in that area. State grants, which are typically more applied research, more applied than a lot of kind of federal grants are. So we're going to see more at that stage. Again, there's, the EU Horizon funding spans a pretty broad range of things. So that includes AR&D, and the Innovation Fund, I think, is also kind of focused, that I talked about, is focused kind of at this stage. There's a minimum technology readiness level you have to hit there. Some philanthropic money still available at this AR and applied research stage, but probably a little bit less. Once you're getting into deployment or technology demonstration and deployment grants, there's definitely more money for this stage than there has been previously, right? So this is both a function of the fact that the bipartisan infrastructure law really focused on kind of later stage, more deployment or demonstration ready technologies, and there's just more climate tech that's been going through the R&D pipeline and is like at this stage, right? More than there has been historically. So examples here would be the DAC hubs that the federal government, the DOE, is putting out. Over $3 billion for those. It's really exciting. Those are going to fund a network of projects that are going to support a range of CDR, not just kind of what you call conventional DAC. We can talk more about that. I think we should expect more funding from the states because they again have kind of a more applied or demonstration funding focus. Again, more Horizon money. And then on the philanthropic side, things like the Carbon Removal X Prize, which I'm sure everyone is well aware of, and some of you here are probably winners of the Milestone Award, so congrats. I think once you're kind of getting to scaled deployment, right, which is the goal, we need to get this industry to gigaton scale very quickly. We're seeing things like the Frontier Fund with advanced market commitments, the Breakthrough Energy Catalyst, which is blended finance. Not CDR is not eligible for the DOE Loan Programs Office yet, but I think we can expect to see hopefully mechanisms like that when we're starting to kind of build larger plants. So yeah, definitely want to leave a lot of time for Q&A. I think just in terms of pursuing funding and how you actually get to that point, there's a couple of points here. So it's really important to focus on the identification and assessment part of this. In my view, it's the most important part of the entire process of securing funding, because if you're not focusing on the right opportunities, then you're basically just wasting your time and you have a very low chance of success. And so it's really important to take a really strategic view of the ecosystem when you're doing that identification and assessment. Be really comprehensive about it. That will allow you to kind of take that strategic view. So at CFS, we developed this process that we call mapping the funding ecosystem. Some of you may have heard me talk about this before. Basically it's a process to do just that, but we've basically standardized it. And this allows us, it's one of the main reasons I think that we have such a high success rate. It enables us to, ensure that the opportunities we're identifying and putting in the funding pipeline have the highest chance of success of all the opportunities in the ecosystem, and are the most well aligned with your priorities and what you want to do, right? So not trying to get you to chase funding off your roadmap, but actually execute on your roadmap and the initiatives and programs that you are trying to do. And one of the things that the ecosystem mapping process, or just a strategic approach to identification of opportunities in the ecosystem, allows you to do, is it allows you to develop an integrated fundraising strategy, right? So you're not just saying, okay, well, we're going to raise equity here, here, and here. You want to integrate your strategy by understanding where you apply non-dilutive funding and equity and how you balance those two things, right? So you're wanting to take full advantage of the capital stack. They can kind of, the two forms of funding can often mitigate the drawbacks of each, because there are drawbacks in both cases. And so you can take the funding pipeline you've developed through the ecosystem mapping process, look at your technology roadmap or your pathway to commercialization or scale, see where you can apply the non-dilutive funding opportunities, and then where you will need or can kind of take equity and develop the integrated strategy from there. I've seen that be much more effective when you're trying to go forward and make business plans. I think there are just in general, when you're pursuing funding, a variety of things that you can do to make it easy on yourself. Developing effective partnerships, making sure again that your project designs are aligned with the actual operational priorities that you have. That you are developing your scopes of work and budgets and other things that are going to make it as easy as possible for you on the back end with post-award management, because that is something that you do need to take into account, that you can also assess when you're doing the identification and assessment process. Yeah, so more thoughts on the tactics there, but maybe I'll just stop here and hand it back to Jason here.
Thank you, Joel. Lots of really interesting stuff to unpack there. We've had several questions come in from the audience, so thank you. And when I message some of you that it might be time that before too long, we'll ask you to unmute and ask your question yourself. One question I have for you, Joel, actually, before we get to that, how do you see the landscape changing maybe over the next, from your standpoint, over the next maybe 6 to 12 months? You'd mentioned it makes a lot of sense to take a strategic view of things. Where do you see things going in the, over the next few quarters?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's only going to increase, right? So in the US, there's this, the bipartisan infrastructure law. Most of that funding has not been allocated yet. So there are going to be lots of releases for CDR and also carbon capture over the next several quarters. So that's going to be, coming out at a pretty regular intervals. Mm-hmm. Europe is getting farther in the kind of development of their CDR strategies. So I would expect more funding coming out of there. I mean, they have a $600 billion fund for Green Deal. And I think, 36 plus in the Horizon program. So there's a lot more funding opportunities coming out of Europe. And then I think just more and more new philanthropies are popping up every day that are focused on CDR. There are, a lot of philanthropies that are very interested in understanding CDR. And that's one of the reasons actually that we started the climate map. It's because me and the other co-founders were getting incoming from a variety of people, but a lot of philanthropists saying, I don't know how to navigate this ecosystem. I don't know how to apply my dollars most effectively. How do we do that? So that was really kind of the original impetus to start the project, and it has kind of gained a life of its own. But I think just to answer your question generally, it's more funding coming out from all of the different sources.
Great, thank you. Sean Lowry, noticed you had a question from Carbon Minerals, who's, by the way, an X Prize winner and also an AirMiners Launchpad alum. Sean, would love to hear your question.
Thanks, Jason. Hi, everybody. Hey, Joel, that was great. My question is fairly esoteric, but it comes from our experience with non-dilutive funding. It's all project-based. Governments, they want projects. And for a startup, projects can be constraining. You've got to predict everything in advance, and then it's very hard to pivot and adjust. So in the philanthropic world, advanced practice, the best philanthropies are moving towards core grants, unrestricted. So they trust the organization to be able to use the money most effectively and pivot and move as the world goes on. So I'm wondering, are you aware of any climate non-dilutive funding that is unrestricted?
I think in general, you're right that most of the funding, even philanthropic funding to private sector companies, in my experience, is largely project based. Certainly as a private sector company, you can partner with a nonprofit to kind of secure some of that core funding, or get a fiscal sponsor to get some of that more core funding. There certainly are opportunities here and there. I think you kind of have to swim in the pool that exists, right? So it's mostly going to be project-based project funding. I think the key is really in project design. So you're designing projects that aren't going to constrain you. And there are different ways of doing that. So you want to, look at your roadmap, allow for some wiggle room, but you want to basically just align it with your roadmap, align it with whatever project you're trying to accomplish, but also give yourself wiggle room in certain places that is going to enable you to kind of work on the core funding that you're going to apply it to anyway. The other point I would make is that I think a lot of people think that they can't change anything once they secure a grant. That is definitely not true. I've been in companies that have secured grants. We've changed sites, we've changed focus, we've changed partners, we've changed direction. So there is a process, if you really do need to change things, there is a process in the post-award management to make adjustments, because I think you have to remember that, like most funders, their objective once they give you the money is for you to be successful, right? They're not trying to, in most cases, kind of constrain you. Your program managers are going to try to work with you to be as flexible as they can within the bureaucracy that they sit in in order to make you successful, because that's a feather in their cap, that's a feather in the funder's cap, right? And it's the same thing with philanthropies as well. So it's really about making sure that you are designing your projects that are just really oriented or aligned with your roadmap, giving yourself some flexibility in how you design the project, and then having a good relationship with the funder so that you can make any scope changes that you need to make.
That's great advice. Thank you.
Excellent. Maya Kashbov had a question about technology readiness level.
Hi, Joel. Yes, thank you, Jason. My name is Maya. I'm from the business development team at Captura. We were also one of the X Prize milestone winners for our direct ocean capture technology. So my question is TRL 5 or 6 a little bit too late in the game to qualify for a lot of this funding? We're getting ready to deploy our first pilot at the end of this summer. So we're wondering how that compares to what you're looking for.
Yeah, I think there is funding that's going to be available at any stage, right? Which is, I think there's, went through kind of the basic R&D, applied R&D, TD&D, right? I think TRL 5 is maybe you can hit some applied R&D, some, technology demonstration and deployment grants. There's definitely grants and non-dilutive funding at kind of each point in the readiness level. So there are very few people that I would say, oh, you're too early or you're too late. There's going to be something out there for you. The key is finding it and assessing the best opportunity, which is why I talk about the ecosystem mapping process all the time, because what you want to do is you want to take that holistic view of the ecosystem and identify the opportunities that are going to be the best fit for you at the stage that you're at, because there may not be, SBIR is the program everyone talks about. That may not be the best fit for you, but there may be some other programs that people don't know about that are frankly less competitive and more money that may be a really, really good fit for your technology readiness level, but can be hard to find if you're just kind of doing a cursory look. And so it's really important to kind of really get in there, take a comprehensive look, understand, where the funding is coming from in the entire ecosystem, and then you'll be able to kind of hone in on the opportunities that are appropriate for your TRL, your topic area, your solution.
All right, thank you. So next question is from Craig Bagnall. Craig.
Morning, everybody. From
Hey.
Australia here. So it's early in Australia, so bear with us. Thank you. Thank you, Joel, for the excellent information. We're obviously being based here, and Australia's only just got a government that actually believes in climate change. So we're finally joining the rest of the world, and we don't have a lot of non-dilutive financing available here. Just about all of the public grants that have come out are normally requiring matched capital. So if you need a couple of $1 million or something like that to get going, you've got to try and raise that yourself. And normally if you can get one, you can normally get 2 or 3 without needing grants. So that's been our challenge. In terms of a lot of the public funding that's coming out of the US and elsewhere, are you aware whether or not other companies can get access to that? And obviously I'm aware of the X Prize and things like that, but we're sort of looking at other things as well.
Yes, absolutely. This is a very common question, especially since we do work globally. So we help US-based companies secure funding in Europe and the developing world. We help international companies secure funding in the US. So it's definitely doable. I think that you have to kind of understand how to work the system. So there's a couple of different things to do. Number one, and I'm going to keep harping on this, is the ecosystem mapping process, really understanding the entire scope of what opportunities are out there. And then you're able to really down select the ones that are appropriate for you. So some funding opportunities are open to different types of entities, but they don't actually care where you're based. And that's a lot of kind of state grants. What they care about is that the work is happening in their state, for example. So we just won, or not just, it was last year. Feels recent. We won last year a $1 million funding opportunity from NYSERDA in New York State for a company that was based in Berlin. They had no office, no operations in the US, no US entity, but all of the work was going to happen in New York. They were going to hire people there. They were going to move people over from Germany. And so it didn't matter that they were a foreign company. It's really about kind of the work that goes on in, when you're kind of getting into, US federal funding, oftentimes they will want a US based entity, which is pretty easy to set up a Delaware C Corp. And then you can just apply through that. And they don't really look into the ownership structure, and you can just apply with your US based entity. Some opportunities do look into the ownership structure. So they'll say, it can't be owned more than 50% by, persons that are not a US citizen or US permanent resident, or companies that are based outside the US. So they will kind of look back at the ownership structure. But there are also ways to get around that, but primarily just through partnerships. And this is a pretty common thing to do, even if there's, even if you're not a foreign company. oftentimes there's an opportunity that's really perfect for what you're doing, but it's only nonprofits, or it's only an academic institution that's eligible, or you know that they want to see, even if you're eligible, you know that they want to see an academic institution leading it. And so you either work with an existing partner, or we can help you go out and identify a partner to serve as the lead applicant. And that's what we do a lot of times for companies that are international trying to work in the US. And if they're looking back into, the ownership structure, we'll identify a lead applicant.
Fantastic, thanks. At the risk of one quick little other question, if that's all right, Jason, what would you say, apart from your ecosystem mapping, is the absolute critical bit of information that a company should put forward to people in that first approach?
Sorry, in the first what?
In a first approach to going to once you do have a partner or whatever else with, but what is the critical bit of information that people are looking for typically to provide through obviously having decent, carbon assessment, or, all those, what's the critical bits of technical or economic information, particularly like business cases, whatever else, like they'll get interested in you, and the first thing they'll say is, right, okay, well, what's the next step to have that ready for them? We've often had approaches where people get interested in our technology, but then we may not have had a business case ready or something that they wanted specific to what they needed. So I was just wondering what's typically ready, because it can take time to prepare, and it's better to be ready in advance.
Yeah, I mean, there are kind of typical things that most funders ask for, but I think what it boils down to is two the most basic things. Number one, do they have confidence that you can carry out the project that you say you can carry out, and do it at a high level, and do it better than anyone else that they're looking at? So that's number one. Number two is, how good of a fit are you or the project for their funding priorities, which is why project design, again, is so important, because you're trying to not only align it with your priorities, but you're trying to align it with their priorities as well, right? So they're extended, they have a mandate from whatever authorizing authority their funding comes from, whether that's a philanthropic board, or high net worth individual, or whether that's a enabling legislation for a government entity. They need to be find projects that are as closely aligned with that as possible, and then have the greatest impact, that's well aligned with the opportunity. So there's a lot of other things, but I would say those are probably the two most important things and frankly, those are the two most important things you look at when you're assessing an opportunity that you want to do as well. Thank
you very much. Cheers, guys.
Thanks. Lisa Sophie Egner had a question about if she could share the name of the German company, if you're able to.
Yeah, I'm not able to share that thing. Sorry.
No worries. Okay, next question is Roger Smolin.
Hi there. Thanks for speaking with us today. My question or request is, maybe if you could run us through a case study, maybe an example engagement that you've had with a startup, and kind of share the types of things that you have provided, the services and benefits to that company, and maybe what that startup did as part of that partnership. I mean, at our company, we've written several grants. So my question is, it sounds like you help find the right grants and perhaps even write them, but it sounds like there's a whole lot of other things that you do as well to support the startups. So I'm curious if you could maybe give us a case study example of a startup. That would be great.
Yep, absolutely. So yeah, it's a good question, because I think that one of the things that kind of differentiates us from a lot of other folks that kind of are doing what we're doing, in addition to kind of our climate focus, is our technical capacity. And so we're able to provide other services kind of within the context of finding these funding opportunities, which are often essential because we're going after multi-million dollars, multi-tens of millions of dollars opportunities, right? So usually, not always, usually we'll start with the ecosystem mapping process. Of course, if someone comes to us with an opportunity they want to pursue, well, first we give them our candid assessment of whether it's a good idea or not. And then, but most of the time we'll do the ecosystem mapping process. We'll develop a funding pipeline that's typically tens of millions of dollars. It's prioritized. We figure out a schedule or a cadence of how we're going to approach the different opportunities, and then we'll start pursuing those funding opportunities. So an example is the funding we just won for the company through the ARPA-E Hestia program. I forget what Hestia stands for, but it's basically building material decarbonization. And so we identified this opportunity as the highest priority opportunity. We helped them pursue that opportunity, but there were a variety of things that needed to be done. Like helping understand how their technology roadmap fit with the priorities of the opportunity. Oftentimes folks will have kind of a track A commercialization plan or technology roadmap where they're like, okay, we can go along this track and commercialize this, but they may have a track B that's like, well, if we can get the funding to do this, it can be a complete game changer, breakthrough. We can commercialize it and probably scale even faster. So oftentimes that's a good candidate for non-dilutive funding. And in this case, that's what we did. We helped them understand, okay, this is appropriate for your track B. This is how, your track B R&D or product development, this is how you can kind of apply the funding and align the technology roadmap with the opportunity. Help develop the commercialization plan, because it wasn't their kind of primary focus. So developing that commercialization plan, developing that kind of integrated fundraising strategy, helping understand how the technology roadmap comported, and then putting all that together in a coherent narrative, and all of the other bells and whistles that are needed for a project. When the agency came back to us, helping them understand exactly what the agency was looking for in terms of their responses. And then we're currently helping them with post-award management. So we don't do kind of full service writing all the reports for people, but we win funding for an awful lot of people. And so what we do is we help them understand, this is how you set up your accounting process. This is how you set up your workflows. This is how you communicate with the funder, just to lower the overhead of the post-award management process as low as possible. And then we also did work on the front end to lower the burden of post-award management by in the project design, in the scope of work, in the budget. So there are a variety of things you can do on the front end to lower that. So help them get funding, but also really help develop the technology roadmap, commercialization plan, and other things that were really needed to access that funding. And I would say just one other thing, that was a relative, the smaller grant. It was 2.2 million. So we're currently working on two $50 million opportunities that are $100 million total project, and in leading those projects, we've done 3 $60 million projects in the last couple of months. And in those, it was really, we had to put together a very large consortium. And so oftentimes we will go out and identify partners and secure partners. If the person already has partnerships, we'll help kind of cultivate those, put the entire project together. So those are kind of, it's a different type of work in addition to the more technical things in terms of putting together the consortium.
Thank you.
Maria, please feel free to unmute and ask your question. And then we'll go to Edward after Maria.
Thank you so much for the great talk. This is very, very helpful. My question is, like, how do you usually kind of work with the clients? Is it gonna be based on like a success rate fee percentage, or is it gonna be like an upfront fee? This is the first question. The second one is, if we want to kind of, for example, secure funding in Europe, should we incorporate in Europe, and where is the best place to do that?
Yeah, so The way we work with clients, we kind of split it between the ecosystem mapping process and the process of pursuing funding. So ecosystem mapping process, very standardized, very streamlined. We know how long that's going to take, pretty much to the hour. So we just offer that on a flat rate basis. That's just a flat one-time fee. You get that funding pipeline, all of the insights that kind of pop out of that process. So maybe there's more funding in a certain geography or with a certain application or a certain funder. You can help kind of guide your proactive funder engagement for each of the opportunities. We do a really deep assessment. So helping you understand, maybe which are the most effective partners for each opportunity, what is maybe the high level project design. And then that's just a one-time fee. So as long as we're kind of working with you relatively consistently, we'll keep that pipeline updated. So that's kind of bucket one. Bucket two is pursuing funding and also doing all the other activities that I was talking with Roger about. So now we just do that on a straight hourly basis. There's no award fee or contingency fee. You had another question about securing funding in Europe. So yes, I think if you're trying to secure funding in Europe, it would be a good idea to incorporate there. If most of the funding likely that you'd be going after is EU funding, in which case it doesn't matter a ton where you're located. I would say Germany is a great place to locate. They do have a lot of domestic funding as well. I think they have like a 70, if I'm recalling correctly, I think a domestic $70 billion decarbonization fund. I could be getting that number wrong, but they have some internal national funding. They have obviously a great industrial ecosystem with a lot of partners. I don't know exactly what you do, but that's another another potential. And then oftentimes with European opportunities, they really want a consortium, and oftentimes with an EU opportunity, they're going to want you to have they're going to require partners from at least 3 European countries. So you're going to have to develop partnerships throughout the continent in any case, or in most cases, but you definitely do want to be, I would say, certainly incorporated in Europe.
In terms of kind of the tax perspective, would Germany still be a good place? Or I've heard, for example, about like Scandinavian countries that are going to also be good in terms of the sustainable development and carbon removal. Is that something that you recommend?
Yes, I mean, yes, I was going to say Northern Europe certainly has a good CDR ecosystem. In terms of the tax implications, I don't know. Sorry.
Yeah.
No worries, thank you.
Yeah, noting that Finland actually a couple of weeks ago enacted a law to make the country not just carbon neutral, but carbon negative. So thank you, Finland. Next, Edward Lowe's.
Hi, thanks very much for your presentation, Joel. That was really useful. And hello from Germany. Good to hear that we've got so much money available here. I wasn't aware. My question was, you mentioned at the beginning that you're not just focused on CO2, but potentially other greenhouse gases. And are you seeing an appetite developing for methane oxidation or methane removal projects?
That's something that we are interested in terms of methane oxidation and obviously other short-lived climate pollutants. It's a tough one. I will be honest with you. There's not a ton of opportunities that are specifically oriented to that yet. There will be. I know that there are things in the works that will be coming out that will be more appropriate for that. But we have been able to work within other programs that are not specifically about methane oxidation in order to kind of secure funding there, right? So whether it's about specific innovation, whether it's about decarbonization of a specific industry when it's applied to if it's applied to a specific application. So there are definitely ways to secure funding for it, and I know that there's funding that's coming down the pike for it. I'd say at this point, philanthropic funding is probably the most appropriate for that right now. But I do know that there is public funding in the works that will be coming down at some point. I don't know exactly what the timeline is, but people are getting wise to that. But that's a topic that I am personally very interested in, and yeah, so interested in and keeping an eye on.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
All right, Yagesh.
Hey guys, sorry, I'm kind of busy here, but yeah, I'll just read what I wrote.
Sure.
Do you have any experience with Canadian system, non-dilutive opportunities? Have you worked with any Canadian companies? Can you talk a bit about that? Thanks.
Yep. Definitely familiar with the the ecosystem in Canada. Have done work there, not like a ton of projects, but have definitely done work, with Canadian companies, with Enercan, and others have helped Canadian companies secure funding in the US. So yes, I'm familiar with that ecosystem. There is a fair amount of climate non-dilutive funding for climate in Canada. It's actually a great place to kind of find R&D funding.
I have a quick follow-up. You mentioned partnerships with, do you think the option of partnering with US companies is a good option for Canadians to access some of the US grants?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have a project going on right now where a Canadian company is partnering with US companies to secure federal funding. So yeah, absolutely. That's a good option.
Okay, thanks. So any other questions for Joel? Feel free to, Piers, please. Piers, you had a question about, if you don't mind, has a question about explain in basic terms at the end of your talk, right before the Q&A. Piers, could you maybe unpack that a little bit, if you don't mind? Hello, feel free to unmute yourself, Piers. Oh, you are unmuted. Is anyone having a tough time hearing? Piers, maybe you can type it in. So right before you went to Q&A, looks like you're having some audio problems, Piers. Look, Joel, right before we went to Q&A, there were some items at the very end of your discussion that might be good to like I said, unpack a little bit. Do you have thoughts on that?
I think what I was talking about was the integrated fundraising strategies. I think that's maybe where I left it off. So
yes, that's what. Yeah, Piers said that's what he's talking about. Yep.
So basically, what I'm trying to express there, right, is that you want to have a plan for how you're going to develop your company, right? You have a business plan, you have a technology roadmap, you have a commercialization plan on how you're going to develop your technology and take it to market, and you have a scaling plan on how you're going to scale it, right? But you need funding for that to support that plan. And oftentimes, or I would say in most cases, the plan is basically to get equity when we need it to increase the runway. And that's fine, but I think equity is a very expensive form of capital. And if you can, and sometimes it is not available to you, at least not in terms that are very beneficial, right? Or advantageous. So if you can secure non-dilutive funding for at various points where in your process of commercialization and scaling, where it is available, it's a cheaper form of capital, right? Because you don't have to sell off pieces of your company, basically. And it helps you in various ways, mitigate other downsides of that, right? So what you want to do is take the ecosystem mapping process that you've done to understand what is out there in terms of non-dilutive funding, and that will help you understand what funding is out there for which activities And then you can look at your technology roadmap and your commercialization plan and match the funding up to the places that the parts of your roadmap and your commercialization plan that you can apply them to. So then you can understand, okay, well, I can get non-dilutive funding here. I can get non-dilutive funding here. I can get non-dilutive funding here. I might need to get slot in equity here where there maybe is a bit of a gap, or you can do it the other way around. I know I can get equity here and equity here, but maybe there's a valley of death here and I need to apply non-dilutive funding there. So really it's a process of being much more strategic in terms of how you're going to fund the development and scaling of your company with different types of capital.
Great. We are just about at time. So I see a couple of really good questions coming in. One's from Sophia Devine. Joel, I shared your LinkedIn in the chat. So for folks who want to connect to Joel that way, that might be the best way to do so. Or for those in AirMiners, Joel's also in AirMiners as well, in our Slack community. A few more links I want to share. So thank you, Joel. This is fantastic. Just to note that the recording of this is going to go up on our YouTube channel in a few days. I offered in the chat the Climate Finance Solutions website for those interested in learning more about what Climate Finance Solutions does, and for reaching out to the company through the website. Our post-event survey is now up for those because we'd love to hear about what we did well, what we can improve on, and how we can make events better in the future. Additionally, as noted at the top, AirMiners Launchpad applications are due at the end of June 30th, for those who are interested in our 6-week program. For this batch, it's, we do not offer funding, nor do we expect equity in return. So that is free of charge to apply, free to attend. Also, our AirMiners events calendar. We have a couple of really interesting events coming up. Carbon storage on July 5th. Also, future events are going to feature William Collins, author of the IPCC report, and also potential event on project financing for carbon removal companies. So lots of really interesting items coming up. Keep your eyes on our AirMiners events calendar and on our AirMiners Slack, but also on your email for future notifications about that. So in the meantime, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Joel. I'm going to stop the recording in a minute and keep the Zoom going for those who want to hang around and continue to network with each other. We might even do a couple Zoom breakout rooms if there are sufficient numbers of people, but thank you so much, Joel. This was fantastic for people to hear, and very grateful that you were able to spend your time with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was great talking to everyone. And yeah, you can reach out on AirMiners or LinkedIn or through the website if you want to chat.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks, folks. Bye.